nothing less. Ever since I was a child, I had a feeling that something is missing in me. I want to know why I am here. Can any of us know that? Become yourself. Then God and the devil don't matter. I want to learn. I want to understand. Be careful. Can you find the force to enable these two quite opposite lives to live together in yourself? At any moment, the wolf can devour the lamb. And you must learn what it means to become responsible. This is an exact science. And that is why you are here.
From the foreknown history to the unknown future, this is Red Ice Radio for the Seeker.
One must strive to know.
Greetings and welcome to our friends and listeners from around the world. It's a delight to be with you again. My name is Henrik, and I want to extend my thanks to everyone who listens in as we dive deep into some of the heavy and controversial stuff. We try to unfurl the complex, study both the parts and the whole in an effort to understand. This is an ongoing process, as we've said before. Nothing stands still or is static. Things change and move around, things die, and things grow. We learn new things, and questioning is something that I believe that you need to continue to do to remain both focused and centered, no matter how much you think you know or how much you think you have it all down. RedIceCreations.com is our website. We encourage you to follow us regularly. You can stream or download our program from the website whenever it pleases you, and we spare you from commercial interruptions during the program. Today, we have another roundtable discussion. We are going to talk about lost civilizations, mound builders, and the giants of ancient America and the world with three guests. Ross Hamilton is with us. He's the author of several books, including The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, a tradition of giants, wonders, and mysteries of the Great Serpent Mound. His newest is called Star Mounds, Legacy of a Native American Mystery. He also volunteers at Serpent Mound as both interpreter and tour guide, and has been studying the mysteries of the Ohio Valley earthworks for years, offering new ways to approach the earthwork studies. Then we have stonemason and historical detective Jim Vieira. His research over the last 20 years has led him down a bizarre road of intrigue and mystery surrounding the races and built structures of ancient America. Vieira has compiled thousands of accounts of giant skeleton reports, as well as town and county histories, to make the case that the history of our past not only has been deliberately covered up, but is vastly different than what we are told. Last but not least, Hugh Newman is also joining us. He has been with us before on the program, and he's an earth mysteries and esoteric science researcher who has authored 2 books. He also organizes the Megalithomania conferences, co-edits Avalon Rising magazine, and coordinates talks, films, and workshops at numerous festivals. All right, welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you all here today with us. This is going to be both informative and exciting. This is a fascinating topic of giants, of course, in the ancient world. But let's bring you on one at a time, one guest at a time here. Hugh Newman, you've been with us before many times. It's good to have you back again. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having us back.
Excellent. Good to have you here, Hugh. Of course, thanks for doing this with us and helping us to get in contact with the other 2 guests that we're going to bring on as well. First of all, Ross Hamilton, thanks for coming on the program with us.
Yeah, Henrik, thank you for asking me.
Oh, you bet. It's going to be very interesting. And we have also Jim Vieira with us on the other end of this Skype conversation. Welcome, Jim.
Welcome to you, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Now, let's begin here a little bit with, I guess we can begin with you, Ross. Both Ross and Jim are new names on the program. As I said, we have had Hugh with us before, and you guys are familiar with our radio program, and also about some of the stuff we've been talking about when it comes to megalithic sites and everything else with you. But give us a little bit on your background first, Ross, when you got involved in this and kind of some of the research that you've been doing over the years.
Our research started back at the turn of the century, actually in the year 2000, when I made contact with a noted Native American author and leader, Vine Deloria Jr., who has passed away now. He passed away after we got done with the project. But Vine had been collecting on behalf of Native people unusual accounts that pointed out that there was a higher civilization in the Americas than what we've been taught to believe by the white establishment here in the States, and that the prejudice against Native people, as well as blacks, of course, has been so vehement and so continuous since colonial times that we were astonished when we began to hit these nerve roots that were kind of explaining to us a lot of the missing or lost information. Now, we got started with specifically the giants because as we've discussed before in other conversations, the giants are the most intriguing, one of the most intriguing of the subjects of lost civilizations. And we were fortunate here in the United States, and we live in Ohio, which is close to the, it's on the eastern side of the United States, but close to the central part. And we were astonished to find that when we combed through the old township diaries and many of the old scientific journals that we got from the local libraries and from some of the online libraries that we were just learning how to get into at the turn of the century, to find that there were just about an unmitigated number of accounts. We couldn't keep track of all of them, discussing pioneer discoveries when they dug into these earthworks after acquiring the land after the Revolutionary War, and finding a tremendous number of extra large skeletons. Now, we want to put this in context, so you have to understand a little bit about Native history, and Vine helped me out a great deal with understanding history from the American Native point of view. And it's completely in reverse to what we've been taught. We've always thought of the Native person as the noble savage, but during the early part of the 20th century, in the late 1800s, when the Darwinian theory was coming in, Darwin was transposed into what we call social Darwinism, and that was immediately laid upon our apprehension or our understanding of Native existence, especially in pre-Columbian times. And as a result of fitting Darwinian precept over the social history of Native people and prehistory, we decided that Native people were not quite human. They weren't quite evolved enough to give a reputable version of pre-Columbian history. And as a result of that, the scientific community decided to exclude Native testimony. And as a result of the exclusion of Native testimony, and that occurred officially through Smithsonian and through other academic sources at Harvard, Yale. As a result of that, all the accounts of Native history were completely annihilated from the record. So as this prehistoric history was eliminated, we depended completely upon what we could find. And by the time we could find anything, most of the mounds had already been uncovered, looting them to look for gold and artifacts of value. So basically, before we move on to specifics, there were 6 or 7 reasons why these giant skeletons literally disappeared. And with the help of this non-belief and wanting to get the lands of Native people away, the government kind of sided with this exclusion of the Native testimony and the fact that the very tall people recorded in our American history were said to be of a time-honored tradition of selective mating or marriage, both fragile and in a stage of imminent collapse. So, in other words, when the first pilgrims came over, there were still very giant and tall people, but they were subject to the disease that the white people were bringing over. And as a result of that, their already delicate inbreeding through marriage from their ancient lineages was very subject to disease. So smallpox took its toll. Then there was the factor of the pioneers and their immediate generations unearthing so many graves so quickly and fast that the remains of the giants, what we call the tall people, rapidly went back to the earth when contacted with the oxygen of the atmosphere. And so many of the skeletal remains that were uncovered by the early settlers, the antiquarians, which are the pre-archaeology version of science, collectors, museum officials, etc., were already in such a state of apparent antiquity that they had already been returned to the consistency of the earth. Now, I'm quoting from my book a little bit, so bear with me. The skeletons that did endure, the white man was just amazed by them because they were, likened to these biblical giants. The tall giants that supposedly were the sons of God.
Yeah.
And so they likened them to that, and so these skulls went for big bucks. And so they took the long bones of the legs and the skulls, and they sold them and traded them. And within a short period of time, they were so disarticulated that the rest of the bodies were lost. And then the skulls passed hands, became damaged, and almost none of them exist anymore. And then, to top it off, Native Americans were so outraged by this going on that in the 1980s, they forced Congress to pass an act called NAGPRA, which is an acronym for Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And so they went into the bone larders of all the museums they could get into, which did not include the Smithsonian, by the way. And they grabbed all these bones and artifacts that they could find, and they threw them back into the earth at secret places. So we lost a lot of them. But we did talk to some of the native tribes that had done to the midst of the repatriation, the Nez Perce, the Chumash, and the Shawnee, and the Cherokee, and so forth. And they said, yeah, they got a lot of bones of giant chieftains and so forth.
Wow.
So, and then there's also the minor issue of the modern day use of heavy equipment, which destroys relics before they can be properly unearthed.
Fascinating.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Really good. We're going to return, Ross, to some of these points, of course. Ohio overall has to be one of the most exciting places when it comes to, the mounds there and everything else. So we'll return to many of these questions as well. Let's bring in Jim here as well. I want to ask you a little bit about your background and interest in this and joining in the conversation here, Jim.
Yes. Actually, it's very synchronistic, as I'll talk about in a second. I'm a stonemason by trade. And about 20 years ago, I started to find strange structures in the woods, and my brother is a stonemason also. And I started to realize that they didn't fit a colonial context. I would see stone turtles and serpents, cairns up to 9 foot tall that were not farmers' clearing piles and chambers and other structures. And I read the book Manitou by Jim Maver and Byron Dix, a couple of researchers who studied these stone monuments for at least 7 years, and concluded that they were the remains of Native American ceremonial structures. In fact, the oldest burial mound in the country is in the Northeast in Labrador, at Lansomore, Labrador, the 7,500-year-old maritime archaic stone burial mound. So, my belief and a lot of other researchers is that there is a legacy of ceremonialism in the Northeast that goes back at least 9,000 years ago. Like the maritime archaic, they hunted for swordfish deep out to sea. They had sophisticated geometric designs on their artifacts, and they traveled thousands of nautical miles, and very little is known about them. And I started to study the mound builders. I mean, I'm a voracious reader, and I didn't even find out about the mound builders until I was like 35 years old. And the astounding constructions, the earthen pyramids, the geometric forms, the mathematics embedded in it was astounding. I had always been taught that Native American civilizations were unsophisticated, nomadic, and savage. So it really irritated me why all these things were not known about. So in the course of my research, I started reading through town histories looking for accounts of pre-colonial stonework, which I found many of them when the colonists showed up. But I also found the mention of an 8-foot skeleton with double rows of teeth in the famous historian George Sheldon's 1895 History of Deerfield, Massachusetts. And that propelled me to read thousands of pages more. And all around New England, I found similar things. Martha's Vineyard, 7-foot double rows of teeth. Town history of Middleborough, 7-8 double rows of teeth, on and on and on. And then I went to the museum in Deerfield, that Sheldon founded, and I found that he had an archaeological scrapbook filled with giant skeleton accounts from the New York Times and other sources. And on display, they had the femur bone of an over 8-foot skeleton that was reinterred recently as part of NAGPRA. And I spoke to the physical anthropologist who was part of the team. So I have all these, I listened to your show, the Red Ice show with Hugh talking, and I was interested, and I said, I'm going to go down to the conference in Connecticut. So I go down to the conference, I meet Hugh, I listened to Ross and Jeffrey Wilson talking about giants, and I got my list of giant accounts thinking I uncovered some great mystery. And synchronistically, I then teamed up with Ross. I've been in contact with Hugh and a series of other researchers. And we've put together literally thousands of accounts. I would say well over 2,000 accounts right now, many times talking about anatomic anomalies like double rows of teeth, massive jaw bones you could fit over the face of the finder. Just literally hundreds of these accounts all over the country in obscure town histories and scientific journals, and it stretches the imagination to believe that somehow in an age of inefficient communication, people knew about these things and reported on them in a hoax-like fashion with no perceived gain. So my intuition is that this is a real phenomena. And then reading Ross's book and more material, I was like, oh my God, I just can't believe how much information is out there. And I've come to realize that there is it's not like every anthropologist and archaeologist meets in a secret room or something like that. It's just they have been fed historical propaganda and censored accounts for so long. They've been told that this is like leprechauns and mermaids. So when you contact them, there is no intellectual curiosity or open-mindedness. You're immediately shut down like you're out of your mind. And it has just inspired me to I run a Facebook page called Stone Builders, Mound Builders, and the Giants of Ancient America. And I write Your Daily Giant. And I have hundreds of posts that go in depth and show records and just really compelling evidence for the existence of this. And I believe this is the first domino to fall. I believe this is one of those quote-unquote controversial subjects that will be proven true and open the door to a rethinking of anthropological, archaeological, historical, and Darwinian theories.
Very good. Very good, Jim. Well, that's fascinating in itself. More to discuss about this, of course. Hugh, let's turn to you a little bit. You've been an intricate part of this kind of research, of course, ever since you've been doing the work that you have with megalithomania. The giants part of all of this, if you will, has to be one of the most interesting and outrageous areas that there is, right, Hugh?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the problem with the giant theory, especially, in academia, is that it's all wound up in myth and legend, and in biblical stories. I mean, there's too many to mention here, but with Goliath and the fallen angels and all this kind of stuff. And also in England, and in France and all over Europe, many of the legends and folklore with the megalithic sites is that they were built by giants. Stonehenge was called the Giant's Dance, and I've just I just did a bit of research recently, and this whole thing about David and Goliath, even though it's like a sort of mythical, biblical story, apparently in that area where this supposedly took place, there's actually a large mound was built that hasn't been excavated yet, as far as I know, where Goliath or his family were said to be buried. I think around the sort of north of Damascus or some area around there. So the more you look into this, the more you find. Even in some of the mounds around Stonehenge, there's said to be some giant skeletons were discovered. There's the famous Irish giant that was fossilized, and the list goes on and on and on. And I didn't really take any notice of it until I actually read Ross's book, A Tradition of Giants, when I stayed with David H. Childress's place for a while back in 2007, I think. And I just devoured the whole book, and I was like, oh my God, this is a whole other angle on these ancient sites. So from that, I went to California from Arizona. I went to California, and I'd read, I think it was mentioned in Ross's book, and it was in one of David Hatch Childress's own books, about a 12-foot giant that was discovered at Lompoc Ranch, which is not too far from Los Angeles. So I went to Lompoc Ranch, and I tried to investigate. I went to the local historical site. There's nothing about it. But exactly where the ranch used to be was now a full-fledged military base covering the whole area. And this is the same. You start noticing this as Jim and Ross will both point out, and you've mentioned already, most of the giant discoveries end with the Smithsonian, but a lot in England and in Europe, you often get where these amazing discoveries and these skeletons were found, you get military bases right over the top of them. And so this is kind of, we have to question, is this a conspiracy? Are they trying to, whoever it is, are they trying to stop us knowing about our true heritage? Are we related to the giants? I think that's one of the questions that kind of keeps popping up when any of us discuss this. But I went on a road trip last year exploring the whole giant culture. Started in New England. We drove through Pennsylvania, and even in Pennsylvania, they found I've found quite a few reports of some that are over 11 foot tall around Harrisburg area. And obviously Jim's done all the research in New England, but throughout western New York State into Pennsylvania and through into the Ohio Valley, but also, off the coast of the islands off the coast of California. They found, there's something like 300 giant skeletons that were said to have been discovered there. So it's everywhere. In South America, there's Turkey, even in France. It's just everywhere you go. It seems like this is one part of history which has been deliberately deleted from the history books. And I think, as Jim rightly points out, it needs to be brought back to the surface. And the first domino has now been knocked over.
All right. Yep. Very good. Now, we need to get into this idea of who they are, who the giants are. And as you mentioned, Hugh, this question, if they are, the original natives, if you will, of planet Earth or something else. Why don't we begin with you, Ross, and give us your take on who and when and where, if you will, of this, interesting question.
Okay. Thanks, Henrik. My background is as an initiate philosopher. I was initiated by an Indian perfect master of spiritual science, Kapal Singh, back in the late 60s. And I spent 40 years in meditation, clarifying and studying the ancient philosophical traditions all over the world. And what I've discovered and what the giants have helped to bring home is something that I'm attempting to pen down in a couple of books. But again, we need context for understanding. And that is that our planet has not always been strictly a physical entity. From time to time, the human population transforms itself into a population of more perfect beings, what we would call godlike beings. And the last notion we had or have had of an advanced golden age kind of civilization is with through the mythologies of Atlantis and Lemuria. But local traditions suggest that there have been times when, just within the last 6,000 years, pockets of the spiritual science, the tradition of land and sky management, have cropped up in England, I think in the Glastonbury region, here in the Ohio Valley, in Guatemala, in Greece, and I think Egypt was a prominent colony of Atlantis as well. Let's go back a little bit in time, even before 12,000 years ago, and we read that at one time, before the gods ruled the planet, that there was another system of titans, and that these titans were 12 in number, and that they were likened to the great passage of time, the great year, and they were led by Kronos, which name translates as time. Kronos was very upset with his father, Oranos, who was the sky. Oranos means sky, because Oranos had become sort of separated from his wife, who originally was his mother, Gaia. Gaia is still a popular term for the earth, which I like to bring back, by the way. And so this relationship between Uranus and Gaia was very advantageous and bore fruit for eons. There was a cooperation between heaven and earth. And in fact, in the very beginning, the earth was said to have not had a heavenly sphere, but that by interacting with primal love, Eros, she created the sky, which translates nowadays to mean not just the atmosphere, but the protective spirit of the sky, the magnetic field. So the spirit of Gaia, which was referenced by John Michel, he was the first one, along with Rudolf Steiner, to kind of help us to bring back this knowledge that has been passed down through philosophical tradition. This spirit of Gaia was once utilized, it was once harnessed by the inhabitants of the planet in order to produce a stronger and more protective magnetic field, and also to produce a sort of alchemy that conferiated, in other words, that married the energy of the sky with the energy of the earth. The two aspects of the magnetic field, the sky aspect, which produces clouds and a more negative charge, and then the earth's aspect, which is produced out of a multitude of various elements and therefore produces more of a positive charge, less electrons and more of the ethereal magnetic current. So when these two are brought together through specific temple systems, which focus the energy of the earth so that it can kind of elicit or bring down, I should say solicit, or bring down to the capstones of the old pyramids and the spires of the old temples, the charge of the sky. The result was a constant production of what we call prana, or life force, or vitality, which, when it's kept going, literally created a transformation of the earth and impregnated the hard, cold material of the earth with life force energy, bringing everything to life. And so the earth at one time enjoyed a system that was artificially produced, but had the helping hand of another grand cycle, which lasts the length of the precessionary period, called the Great Year, which allows us to have a natural golden age in a period of about 8,000 years over a 25 or 26,000 year period. Mm-hmm. But the populace, which was kind of shored up with a group of enlightened individuals, who we call the sages and the rishis, the gods of the ancient days, decided to keep the golden age preserved by allowing the field of the earth the natural magnetic field of the Earth to bring together its twin aspects and create an abundance of the life force. And the last time we saw one of those Renaissance periods was about 6,000 years ago, and it completely petered out about 5,000 years ago. And that's why we see history seeming to have begun about 3000 BC. So, in a nutshell, the reason the giants kind of petered out and why it's so difficult for us to believe they ever really existed is because we lost the illumination of higher consciousness when we lost that spiritual technology, which is outlined very well between Steiner and Michel's writings. So, in brief, we have forgotten. And the giants have become a part of the stuff, like Jim says, of mermaids and leprechauns, fairy tales, because we can't comprehend the subtle material that is produced when we steward the earth properly and bring about the life force in abundance.
So let me ask you this to clarify that point a little bit, because it's a very interesting one. You're saying then that the properties, if you will, of the earth are what's driving how the humans on the earth appear and what they can do and so forth. So you're saying that the giants, in effect, are human beings, right? In a different form. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's a funny thing. I mean, Vine Deloria, who was my native teacher, inculcated in me that you have to understand that the animals have shrunk in size too.
Yeah.
And that there is something going on in the atmosphere all over the world, during the Pleistocene period that allowed things to grow naturally and that the genetics of everything was allowed to flourish and come out wholly. So, the earth once enjoyed a prosperity, and that many of the animals and people have disappeared, the various kinds of animals, because they can't sustain the kind of life that they need, rich in the etheric, the fifth element of the ether, the etheric condition, without some artificial production or waiting, 12,000 years for the golden age to come back naturally. So it's up to us really to do this. And the Maya teach us that once every 5,120 years, the masters come back and they teach us how to steward the earth, and we reconvene the golden age for a period of 1,000 years. So, we in the underground, and I learned a lot from Hugh about what was going on in his neck of the woods in Great Britain. And now I've learned a lot from Jim, who's put together this network, who he's helped to put together this ghost network of collection of magnetic energy all through the eastern United States with the stoneworks. We're reconvening this understanding of the possibility of reproducing the life force enough so that we can begin to live decently again and grow things and bring out their proper DNA structure through the adhibition of a pure life force energy.
A very interesting point. I've heard it before, more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would result in greater vegetation on the earth, which would produce more oxygen, which would result ultimately in more food. And people have theorized that this is also what actually could support the dinosaurs, for example. They've noticed that the nostrils of some of these giants are as big as they are on a cow today. And it's like, would it be impossible for this huge animal to even get that amount of oxygen into their body quick enough? So what has been speculated, I've heard, is that what that equals is that there had to be more oxygen basically in the air at that time to be able to support these huge animals. So this is kind of what you're getting at, I guess, Ross.
Yeah, that's part of it. The balance returns. When we balance the magnetic field and when we pump the life force back into matter, everything comes alive. The rocks, like for example, in Ireland and in Sweden, I've noticed. I think you operate out of Sweden.
That's right.
Throughout Scandinavia, we have these wonderful mythologies of these entry points into the delicate lands, the lands where people live to be very old still. These paradises that are accessible still by the saints and the sages and the holy people because they understand the subtle or fine creations. And these entry points are guarded on the other side by the families and the governments that rule in the higher dimensions of the earth to prevent people of lower consciousness from inadvertently stumbling into these zones. So we hear stories of Bigfoot, and we hear stories of strange zoomorphic beings that inadvertently come into our world from time to time. We just heard a story about giant spiders that exist with feet that spread over 5 feet, like Shelob out of the Lord of the Rings, that are still found in parts of India. And they've been actually documented. So there are animals the Cherokees speak about that once existed, and plants that no longer exist because they can't sustain themselves in the environment that's been created since the earth has been relegated to the sort of dry condition without the moisture of the ether present. Now, Madame Blavatsky, who was an esoteric writer that many of you may be familiar with, stated unequivocally that when the Atlantean civilization was here, they had pyramidal structures placed strategically all through their islands and all over the planet in order to constantly process the energy of the atmosphere with the energy of the earth to produce a sweet, clean, etheric energy, which, when it was released into the atmosphere, helped to restore the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide and other elements. And at the same time, creatures that were harmful tend to be relegated to their specific environments, kind of like Mirkwood. and beings of light had greater access. So we did interplanetary trade, and angelic beings were more easily welcomed and could temporarily sustain communications with the average citizen in those days. When we reopened the membrane, when we dissolved the membrane that required a greater pressure of ether to be present in our environment.
Jim, tell us how you think the various, megalithic monuments and mounds and what have you that you've been looking into play into this, if you're on the same page as Ross on this, that is.
I would think, I'm just guessing that Ross, Hugh, and myself are all on the same page. And, this is separate from all the evidence. It's funny because I am trying to engage in the scientific method and produce a bunch of tangible evidence. But at the same time, listening to my intuition and all I've studied to really paint a picture of what happened in the past. And I would say, if you look around the globe, the most intricate, difficult, and largest stonework is always the oldest. And as a stonemason, I've seen sites, the Great Pyramids, Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, Nanmedal, Costa Rican spheres, and archaeologists get a free pass. They're not compelled to say, you could work on this, diorite and granite for 1,000 years with copper chisels and you'd never get anywhere. So we have a story that's been turned upside down. And everybody, it's like the Clovis barrier. When Jim Avadasio from Mercyhurst College, he unearthed 16,000-year-old carbon-dated remains at Meadowcroft Shelter. He was attacked. He was called incompetent. He was, accused of planting evidence and stuff like that. And you see how academia treats these things. I really think this whole phenomena opens the door on a lost civilization, like an Atlantis-like civilization that flourished. What I found is Madame Blavatsky in Isis Unveiled talks about giants. The Freemasons and the Rosicrucians in their texts talk about giants. They have giant skeleton accounts listed in their literature. Edgar Cayce has several readings where he talks about it, and they all are telling the same thing. The Rosicrucians and the Freemasons talk about Atlantis being, where all their esoteric information came from, and that there was a worldwide grid set up in the past that did what, Ross was talking about. I really feel like it's pointing in this direction. And if you study Native American oral history, and what I found is oral history keeps being verified by science. The ability to understand tsunami frequency by the native tribes on the West Coast, the understanding of the geologic record in western Massachusetts, over 10,000 years old, with Lake Hitchcock and Mount Sugarloaf. So what I found is it's not Native American myth or legend. It is oral history that has a lot of veracity. And they talk about all these, realities, giants and multidimensionality and star people. And, I just believe, like I said, that we're not just going to get proof of one reality. We are going to get a whole different dynamic about our existence and see that, I believe we all share a holographic brain, for instance, a universal mind. So we've all been keeping the truth from ourselves in a way, and we're all waking up to a different reality. And in fact, I'm very hopeful in the future that we will have a much more expansive and enlightened view of reality and what we are ourselves in reality. So I believe this points back to a past civilization that blended its science and spirituality in a way that our cold and arrogant scientific paradigm cannot understand at this point. But people with intuition and compassion are starting to figure out.
Native testimonies and mythology, as Ross pointed out, have been, thrown out, and they've certainly done their best to discredit all of this as fairy tale stories, at best that they're symbolic or religious or something like that. But Jim, let's talk a little bit more about the physical evidence, and also if you think that there, are people and groups, etc., that actually are responsible for the systematic destruction of the physical evidence of giants.
Absolutely. One of Ross's buddies, Alex Hrdlicka, I hope that's the right name. He was the first director of anthropology for the Smithsonian starting in 1910. He's the one who said giants no more. And he was a zealous, racist, really mean-spirited guy who he called Louis Leakey a heretic to his face. And Ross's book is just a great source of all to find out the misdeeds of this character. But he led the charge to marginalize these giant skeleton finds. Let me quickly, I just want to read a couple of things that I found.
Sure.
In the Washington Post, this is one of thousands of accounts, June 24th, 1937, Presiding Judge W.J. Graham of the United States Court of Custom and Patents Appeals unearthed an enormous skull in Stafford County, Virginia. He said it looked almost as big as a watermelon when they mounted it in the Smithsonian. And I found in the Smithsonian's annual report, Graham, Judge W.J. Washington, D.C., human skeletal material from 3 ossuaries in Stafford County, Virginia. The number is 144975. So the Smithsonian has that massive skull as big as a watermelon, verified by the judge, an archaeologist who had sent all his material there. Another, the well-known Newton W. Chittenden, the captain and explorer, he unearthed a massive skull, brought it to the Smithsonian. Hrdlicka commented on it. He held it as a long-treasured and priceless possession. Many European anthropologists measured and observed the giant skull, and he would not sell it. He gave it to the Smithsonian, and let me give you the, and it is in their reports right here. Skull of Flathead Indian, 2 flattening pillows, and the hunting shirt of a half-blood Cree Indian. Catalog number 51082, received as mentioned in the Smithsonian's annual report. I have dozens and dozens of accounts of the Smithsonian boxing up remains and sending them back to Washington, D.C. And when you contact them about any find, you get just a dismissal. We have no evidence for a race of giants. And I'll quickly say, I found, and Ross has too, at least 9 accounts done by their own scientists in their ethnology reports of over 7-foot skeletons, one with double rows of teeth, Augustus Mitchell, 1874, with a giant axe also found in an enormous skull. So the Smithsonian's own ethnology reports are saying these things, and scores of physical anthropologists, scientists, archaeologists are saying the same things. And it is just beyond belief that a multi-generational hoax covering 150 years, engaging thousands of people for no perceived benefit could exist. If you say that this isn't a reality, then you are part of another conspiracy, which a skeptic will never define, that you believe that all these scientific journals, Smithsonian reports, New York Times accounts are somehow fictional, and the thousands of people indicted in them and all the onlookers are part of a vast conspiracy that they didn't complain about. That's what you're saying, essentially. It is just, beyond belief.
Interesting. Now, Hugh, it seems to me that there are more findings on the American continents of giants and giant skeletons, and one of the reasons, if this is the case, is that it's a fairly... Well, it took a little while, if I put it that way, before Europeans headed over there. The native Indians and have a tradition there to kind of keep this in their culture for a longer period of time, and hence it seems like a lot of the finds that were done in the early and late 1900s or 1800s, they've been preserved there or something like that. So that we when people were building something new, they literally stumbled over a lot of these graves, etc. Is that how you see it too, Hugh, or is there another explanation for why there seems to be more giants on the Americas continent?
Well, I don't know. I think it's because it was inhabited by, the native inhabitants, Native Americans, and they didn't really. I guess they don't really build and destroy like the white man does. And so, I mean, I've read reports, for instance, where people were just digging cellars. They were just making, basements in their house. In Pennsylvania, there's several reports of people who were just digging basements or cellars, and they would find giant skeletons just randomly. There wasn't any particular mounds or grave sites or anything like that apparently in the vicinity. But it's the same thing. I mean, if you look at this from a global perspective, I mean, throughout the Americas, there are reports of giants in Mexico, and even down in Peru and Bolivia. Even Viracocha was said to have created, the legend states that Viracocha around Lake Titicaca created a race of giants that were and then there was flood myths involved with that, even in Peru and Bolivia. And when you're looking at it from the megalithic perspective, it gives some credence to the fact that maybe the giants could have actually lifted some of these stones if they worked together. Yeah. But it's just become since Ross has come out with his 3 books on the giants, and Jim's been popularizing it through the internet as well. I feel there's, like Jim said, I think something has to shift here. We have to kind of, I get a feeling because of the Repatriation Act, a lot has now gone missing, so we're not going to have access to some of these skeletons that we would have had a few years ago. But as we've seen in Turkey, like with Göbekli Tepe, sites and discoveries are still being made that are shifting the whole paradigm of the way we view the past. It's a really interesting example from Turkey, and this is just back from the 1950s. This is, near the Euphrates area of Turkey in the southeast, not that far from Göbekli Tepe. But apparently a 15-foot human skeleton was found down there. And other femurs and other skeletons and skulls have been found in that area too, which is the kind of legendary place of the Anunnaki, or some people call it, the fallen angels, and we get into that whole story. But I think we kind of really have to question where all the skeletons gone. I managed to see one giant skeleton, by the way, when I was in America. And if anyone wants to see it, it's at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. And there's a 7'6" or 7'8" skeleton that was, and I did a bit of research on that because, according, traditionally that would have been removed by the Repatriation Act. So I thought, this is interesting. Why is this here? So I did a little bit of research on that and found that it actually came. It was supposed to be just a deformed skeleton, but it looked pretty kind of not too deformed to me. But I did a bit of research and found that when I looked at the report, it came from northern Kentucky, which is the Ohio Valley kind of mound culture area. And what it also said was that the person who supplied it to the museum said the only way they would be able to accept it, they would only give it to the museum if the museum kept their mouth shut about where it came from and how it was found. So that could be a genuine giant skeleton, which is clearly on display in this Muta Museum, which is a biology. It studies the whole human anatomy. The museum does, and it's well worth a visit.
How big was it again, Hugh?
It was 7'6".
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or 7'8" maybe, but and there was a normal sized skeleton next to it, etc. And in the same museum, and also in the Penn Museum, the Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia, are many elongated skulls that are actually from a collection from Peru, as well. So there's quite a lot going on in that area, and the whole, obviously the whole Pennsylvania area is also where obviously lots and lots of giant skeletons have been discovered. Some, they say, up to 11 for 8 inches tall is the largest one I've researched from Pennsylvania.
Wow, very interesting. Ross, I wanted to ask you if you know that there are any other skeletons or skulls left. I mean, I pointed out on a recent program on the very same topic that there are many, fake giant skeleton images out there, photoshopped, etc. This helps to muddy the water and discredit it to a certain degree, but are there any skulls or other giant skeletons that you know of today, like you, Hugh mentioned, that can be viewed, or maybe they're held somewhere by someone?
I have a friend who did some private repatriation, so the bones that this collector had made around the turn of the century would not get given back to Indians. And he told me that he could retrieve a skull if we really needed to. But I myself have never actually seen a giant skull. I've never actually physically seen one. Now, I should mention, I think it's kind of important to mention that we do have giants in our society that are, 7'6", 7'8", like Yao Ming, who plays basketball for the Houston Rockets. He's, I think, 7'8", and Andre the Giant. He was in The Princess Bride, world-class wrestler. He passed away, I think, when he was 35 or 36, because both Yao Ming and Andre had this condition called acromegaly, or gigantism, and it affects the pituitary gland in youth, and it causes an overactive outpouring. And then after the growth hormone has been spent and you're out of your youthful period, then the pituitary stops working entirely, or it's very low functioning, and as a result of that, they can't live sustaining the body that they created in their youth much past the age of 35. I don't think I know of anyone that's lived past 40 with full-blown acromegaly. But these skeletons that we find, not only do they have a genetic base in 7 feet, we hardly found any skeletons that were between 6 foot and 7 foot. We found a few 6'8"ers, but most of them are 7 feet and above. And none of them suffered from the evidence from acromegaly or gigantism. This is important to understand because this was a different race of people. Now, as soon as I say that, people automatically think Anunnaki or space visitors,
Right. Yeah.
And they think about weird because we don't have the education yet to understand that we were the giants. Our DNA has relegated itself to being nurtured in an environment that only knows how to enhance the solid, liquid, gaseous, and fiery elements. We lack the fifth element, which gives us clarity of insight, allows our inner eye to open. It's called the etheric element. And it's, according to the masters, it's intentionally taken away from us so we can have a period of longing for our lost enlightenment, longing for God, in other words, or, the beloved.
Why is that, do you think, Ross? Why do we need that period?
Well, it causes a greater spurt of spiritual growth among the populace. If the light is taken away for 5,000-6,000 years, all the libraries are burned, all of the tombs are dug up. Have you noticed? I mean, it's a point I make in my book, and I think Jim and Hugh agree with me, that if you look back in history, we had this insatiable curiosity to dig up the tombs and the graves. Mm-hmm. We cannot leave them alone. The time capsules, the tombs, the graves, the sepulchres, and, the holy places. We're always looking for sacred places where people would bury their treasures and things. So, there's been free-for-alls, especially when a conqueror comes into a new country and settles in there, like what Alexander did. The first thing that happens is when a new power settles in, they begin to dig up the old tombs, looking for treasure. I think John Michel points out that when during the period of unrest in China, back a couple thousand years ago, when one warlord after another had control, the first thing that happened when a new warlord took over a region was they go to the family tombs of the previously ruling class and destroy the skeletons and loot it. And so the old emperors took great care to hide all of their grave goods and their grave sites, which we know from modern archaeology. So in the United States, when the white man took over, first thing we did was we just eliminated all of the tombs. And there's hardly any left now that we know of. I'm sure there's still some there, but that's what we do. And as a result of destroying history, we become dark. We forget completely, because it was the library at Alexandria that was our last hope. Hitler burned the books too, because, when a new power comes in, you want to get rid of the old. They say that Jesus Christ was a name that was made up to have the sum of a particular number, which Michel points out, and I point out in one of my books. Jesus is valued at 888 because the real messianic figure, philosophers tell us, was Apollonius of Tyana. He was the one that performed all the miracles and so forth. But that when he passed away, the new church structure sought to preserve the teachings of Apollonius, and so they called him Apollos, and he's mentioned, I think, 7 times in the New Testament. But he just became one of the brethren, And Paul, and the point I'm trying to make is that when we burn the libraries, when the Romans took over, and changed, when the ecclesiastical editorship came over and changed things, then we all forget, because we depend on books. So what we're looking for is a time when we can be spiritually recalled of who we are, and then we'll have contact with libraries that have been preserved in the etheric zone of our planet. Now, we should be connected with the etheric zone, but we're not. And again, it's been intentionally taken from us. And now, with the help of guys like Hugh Newman, who I predict is going to become a very important figure, and Jim Vieira, who is going to become a grassroots hero one day. I can see that already starting. We're going to enact a revival of this wisdom that will not be stopped. And there's nothing can prevent the revival of this knowledge. And we will restore Glastonbury. We will restore many of the old temples and begin to start that process that was embodied in the old Titan structures. The Titans were replaced by 12 Olympians. And so there were temple systems laid out through the civilized world. And the Egyptians had the same thing. But originally these temples were powered by the Ark of the Covenant or some other reasonable source to get the reaction started between earth and sky. So, that's what we're looking forward to. that's what Hugh is pushing, and that's what Jim is pushing with the understanding of megalithomania and the importance of training the magnetic currents of the earth and bringing them to the dragon layers. And I know Scandinavia has a rich tradition of dragon layers. And these were the spots where the currents of the earth were converged in order to draw down the Thor power, the lightning power of the sky. Throughout the Norse myths, we see the same thing, that there was a system there that was headed up by some very intelligent people who transcended mortality at one point, but have now been relegated to the myths of Asgard. So, it's a wonderful new age we're coming into.
Well, fascinating, gentlemen. We're going to take a break in a little while here. We should, of course, talk about some of the material that you all have available, upcoming events and websites and such. I just want to ask you one more question quickly here, Ross. If this, what you're discussing here, if this is an external, time-driven property that is coming and going, if you will, like a cosmic clock. You mentioned the great year and the fact that seems to be in a cyclical period of comings and goings, if you will, of this ether. So is it externally driven?
Yeah, actually, it's internally driven in the reality of it, where there is a movement on this planet to get people to meditate more through various channels, and there's been an outpouring of masters of spiritual science leaving India and starting to take incarnation in the West. We're transforming people from the inside out, and then many of those masters are going to teach how to extrovert the internal knowledge and recreate the spiritual science. In other words, take the processes of internal transformation, focus, and love, and so forth, and externalize those same properties through understanding the correct properties of seeds and the magnet, the lodestone, so to speak.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So we'll see a revival of the knowledge externally as we grow internally, you see. So both of these aspects are well underway.
All right, very good. We have much more to discuss in the second hour, and let's talk where our listeners can go to find out more. Jim, let's begin with you. You have a lot of interesting videos out there that people can watch. You mentioned a Facebook page earlier. Do you have any, books in the works or other videos or something like that to come?
Well, first, I have a Facebook page, Stone Builders, Mound Builders, and the Giants of Ancient America. And I post lengthy posts daily, and I have hundreds of giant skeleton accounts, newspaper clips where I go in depth about the story. I talk about the mounds of ancient America and stone structures in New England. I recently did a TEDx video, and it ended up being the #1 watched TEDx video in the world with 118,000 views. And then it was removed from the internet by the fine folks at TED and gave me a list of pathetic reasons. I was, bad-mouthing the Koch brothers and the Smithsonian at the end of the talk, so I can see why it was taken down. So my crime was not to advocate a risky and unproven health cure. I frankly was just reading the Smithsonian's own accounts and town histories in New York Times headlines. So I guess people can decide. There's probably pirate copies of that floating around. Jim Vieira TEDx. I just did an Ignite Amherst 5-minute video at an Ignite conference. And if you hit Jim Vieira Ignite Amherst, you'll get that. It has about 7,000 or 8,000 views in the last day or so. So it's picking up some speed. And, I would say the format, for me, the best format to convey this information is through Facebook, frankly. Every day I do a lengthy post. And unless you're criminally insane, if you read through, 10, 20, 30 of these posts, you will quickly see that the arguments given by skeptics are baseless, that these are not hoaxes. There was just a couple hoaxes, not thousands of them. They are often done by trained professionals. It's not disarticulation. It is not mastodon bones. And the arrogance and the dismissiveness that I face in the personal insults, frankly, I'm from the wrong side of the tracks, and I'll tell you what, when you get personally insulted, it's like, I'll meet you in the back alley. I can't believe the arrogance of some people. But that's a different story. So I gotta talk to my therapist, I guess. But so the reality is it is just, if you get this information out there, people can decide for themselves, and that's all I'm trying to do. I think the Facebook page is the best way to do it. I am working on a documentary film, and I will say that I believe all that what Ross just said, and this isn't about like, oh, giants existed, that's cool, now let's go back to sleep and be compliant consumers. I think it is a wedge into the system that we all have responsibility for creating, that is going to usher in a new understanding of our reality, of electromagnetism, and different multidimensional realms, frankly. I really wanted to second that motion, what Ross said.
All right, very good. You're doing a talk at Megalithomania here. Tell us about that quickly.
Yes, I'm doing a talk in early Utah. I'm doing a talk at the Northeast Antiquities Conference in late April. I'm doing some others, but Hugh asked me to speak, I think it's October 5th, at Megalith America in Boston. And I know Robert Schoch's going to be there, David Hatcher-Childress, and others. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it will be a very good event, very well attended, and I'm very thankful to be part of it.
All right, Ross, let's turn to you and talk a little bit about your material and work. A couple of book titles, of course, that we've been briefly mentioning here throughout the first segment. I believe you have 3 that I'm aware of then out there: Star Mounds, The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, and then A Tradition of Giants. Is there anything I'm missing there, Ross?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I have some smaller publications out, but that's pretty much it. Star Mounds, Legacy of Native American Mystery, The Mystery of the Serpent Mound, and then A Tradition of Giants.
Very good. And do you have a website, Ross, where people can go to read more about your work?
Actually, I used to, but I don't anymore. I'm in the process of gathering my wits together to figure out exactly what I'm going to put up, because research is at a stage right now where I hate to publish anything more than a blog. And I'm not really into the kind of websites that I'm seeing out there. I'm really kind of conservative. I have a kind of a library mentality. So I do have a Facebook site, though. Anybody connect with me, I'll accept anybody. And it's Ross Hamilton. And there's the icon of the Serpent Mound covered with snow next to my name. So no website, but I have a Facebook site, and I'm working on getting a website put up maybe over the next year.
All right. Well, we'll link up that Facebook page so people can connect with you there. That's excellent, and some of your books as well. And then you also have an upcoming event here with Hugh, Megalithomania. Tell us about that, Ross.
Well, you can better describe it, but from my point of view, Hugh has asked me to sort of make public a new discovery that it actually took me quite a few years to figure out, and that has to do with a Glastonbury-like zodiac, but consisting of every conceivable part of the night sky that was embedded upon the landscape probably about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago originally, and then was reconstructed by some Native American people that held on to the traditions of the what I call the Glastonbury of the West. The Ohio Valley is rich with earthworks, but there were probably 60 or 70 of these temple-like structures that contain no burials, and then there was about 10,000 works that contain nothing but burials, and most of those burials held people who were responsible for kind of refurbishing the temple foundations in earth. So these were like a primitive people that were of the ancestry of godlike people, and we have the same situation all over the planet. We have indigenous folk who appear to be very humble and poor and unenlightened, but their myths and stories tell us about a time when their ancestors lived to be very old and were godlike and could perform superhuman functions. And so the book, Star Mounds, is probably what we're going to focus on, along with the giants a little bit. And I'm probably going to ask Hugh to maybe dialogue with me by Skype so that he can ask pertinent questions that he thinks that the people in Great Britain and around the planet that are tuned in will find interesting. Because if I'm allowed to go off on my own tangent, well, you know the result of that.
All right, very good. Now, let's turn to you, Hugh, and give us the website, of course, where people can go to find out more about the events, and if there's any other details and stuff like that about your next few upcoming events that we kind of missed here when it comes to both Ross and Jim and other things you have going on, Hugh.
So the main website is megalithomania.co.uk. That's just details about the conference in England, in Glastonbury in May. Ross is going to be doing a Skype lecture there, and we've got people like Robert Schock, Ewan Mackay, Andrew Collins, myself, Maria Wheatley, and several others are going to be speaking there. And we're doing lots of tours, 5 days of tours, all that kind of stuff. In October, we're doing Megalithomania in America, in Boston. Again, Jim's going to be involved in that. We're going to be exploring the New England megalithic sites, which are fascinating within themselves. And David Hatch-Childress is contemplating joining us, Robert Schock, and a few other very interesting speakers to be confirmed. That's early October. And we want to the theme of the giants seems to be coming more into the megalithic ancient mysteries field, and people are really taking it seriously now at last. We're involved. I mean, Megalithomania, as the listeners probably know, we like to get out to these sites. Whenever we do a conference, we go and explore some sites, and we do sort of tours now to Peru and Bolivia. And we're going to explore Göbekli Tepe and Baalbek in September with Andrew Collins. And almost all these places we explore, you do find the stories of the giants over and over again.
Yeah.
In Ireland as well, we're doing something over there. You can't get away from it, really. But I did this blog. I think if people are interested, it's megalithomania-america.blogspot.co.uk, and this is just my journey with my girlfriend Sheena Gaskell through from New England through Pennsylvania and the Ohio Valley, just on a quest really to understand who these giant people were, why they were building these sites, and some insights along the way. And obviously, I met up with Ross, and we stayed with Ross for almost a week in total, probably. And we met up with various other people, like Robert Schock and Jeffrey Wilson, many others. And so, yeah, it's like Jim pointed out, it's an unfolding story. And I think we're at the point where things are really going to start coming out about this subject very soon.
Right, very good. Megalithomania.co.uk. We'll have the link to the blog up there as well, Hugh. But we'll take a short break here. So thank you, gentlemen. Stay with us, and we'll proceed in a minute. In Hour 2, we focus on etheric energy, enchantment of the landscape, and reawakening the grid of the planet, and much more. We'll proceed in just a minute. I just want to let you know that we have Ulle Dammegård with us next for the third and last part in our series on the assassination of Olof Palme. To continue to listen to our second hour with Ross, Jim, and Hugh, go to redicemembers.com and click on subscribe to sign up for a subscription. You'll, of course, get full access to our archives. We have a few different options for you. Check out whatever suits you. We have some treasures for you in our archives. We highly recommend it. We'll be right back with more.